Joining us now, MSNBC political contributor Ben Rhodes. He served as the Deputy National Security Advisor for the Obama administration. And Ben, here's what Trump said about deploying those 2 nuclear subs just last night.
And a threat was made, and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people. Well, we had to do that. We just have to be careful.
And so I have sent to the region 2 nuclear submarines. I just want to make sure that his words are only words and nothing more than that. We always want to be ready.
So, Ben, regardless of the Russian rhetoric, is it typical for an American president to telegraph the movement of nuclear submarines?
A lot of these things he says are in English on social media. They're clearly intended to kind of get underneath the skin of the United States. Not really, no. Certainly not in this type of circumstance, because, look, Dmitry Medvedev has said all kinds of crazy things since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. For people who kind of don't follow him, he's essentially taken on the role of being a troll. I don't think, there's a military threat attached to what Medvedev is saying. So it's a pretty extreme step to essentially kind of out of an extension of what would normally be like a social media dispute to be moving these nuclear submarines. But, he's clearly trying to demonstrate some toughness here, but it kind of flies in the face of what he said about ending the war on day one and de-escalating all these wars that were taking place when he took office. It's not clear that this really leads anywhere other than a show of strength from Donald Trump.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. So we know that these subs can carry non-nuclear cruise missiles as well, like the ones that we saw the U.S. use to target the Isfahan nuclear facility in Iran. Could the president be signaling here that the U.S. could use that same force against Russia if Russia doesn't end the war in Ukraine on the president's timeline?
I mean, that would be the extreme scenario, but I frankly don't think that the Russians would see this as a credible threat that Trump is actually going to enter the war in Ukraine with U.S. military force. If anything, I do think it's Trump, if you're trying to assign some strategy to it, trying to kind of brush back the Russians from making those kinds of bellicose threats to the United States. And frankly, probably, yes, expressing some displeasure that Putin has repeatedly ignored these deadlines that Trump sets. So there was the ending the war on day one. Then Trump was calling for a 30-day ceasefire, which Putin didn't do. Then he was calling for negotiations directly with Zelensky, which Putin wouldn't do. Now he's had this 50-day deadline that's been shortened. Clearly, the suggestion from the United States, from the Trump administration, is there'll be some consequence if this deadline comes and goes without the war ending. And we have to assume that's what's going to happen. Like, all that's happened since this deadline was set is Russia's actually escalated some of its attacks into Ukraine. That's Putin sending a message that I'm not going to end this war on your deadline. The question is, does the U.S. resort to tariffs, secondary sanctions? That's sanctions on countries that are doing business with Russia. Does the U.S. provide more military aid to Ukraine? I really don't think that Putin is factoring into his calculus the possibility that the United States will literally enter the war directly at the end of that deadline. But I mean, it's a frightening thing that we're even having that conversation in some ways.
A lot of moving parts on the global stage, but let's turn to the Middle East now. Yesterday, I spoke to a Gaza native and senior fellow for the Atlantic Council. His name is Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, and he just wrote a piece for the Atlantic entitled "Hamas wants Gaza to starve." Here's what he had to say about Hamas's role in the hunger crisis.
Multiple things can be true at once. It is a fact that the Israeli government, through its policies, through the directions of far-right Finance Minister Smotrich, are ultimately responsible. Nevertheless, they very much so fell into a trap of Hamas's design. Hamas wanted to see the deterioration of the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, knowing full well that this may be the only hope for drawing in the international community, for producing horrendous imagery that showcase the war as being a humanitarian catastrophe, and therefore hoping to bring about a rapid end to the war.
And Ben, of course, those images are incredibly painful, but much of the international pressure has been brought to bear on the Israeli government and its role in this catastrophe. But if Hamas is leveraging its own people's misery for its strategic gain, as Ahmed is suggesting there, what role can the U.S. play in pressuring Hamas and ensuring that they're denied the ability to essentially capitalize on their people suffering?
I mean, it's really about whether you can work towards a future in Gaza that excludes Hamas. And so you had all the Arab countries come out with a statement yesterday, for instance, in which they said Hamas needs to be completely demilitarized and that kind of alternative Palestinian leadership needs to be developed in Gaza. That's how you're going to get rid of Hamas. This war has been going on for nearly 2 years. Hamas is not being destroyed militarily. They've been significantly degraded. They do not pose the same threat to Israel that they did on October 7th. The question is kind of how do you sideline them in kind of the reconstruction process? And now I do think that the hunger crisis that we're seeing, look, Israel is the strongest party by far. I mean, relative to Hamas or anybody else, they control what gets in and out of the Gaza Strip. Whatever Hamas's intentions are, the reality is that Israel has an obligation to let that food in. We just talked about the war in Ukraine. Even Russia, with all of its bombardment of civilians, is not starving whole population centers in the same way that we're seeing in Gaza. There are hundreds of trucks that are near that border. If they're allowed in and you can have an international effort to provide assistance, you can deal with the starvation crisis and simultaneously work to sideline Hamas in the development and support of an alternative Palestinian leadership structure. This endless cycle of conflict and war is not the thing that is ultimately going to provide an alternative form of leadership for Palestinians. So that's where you have to kind of shift the conversation from just this kind of continued descent into a catastrophe really in Gaza to what comes next and what can be an alternative leadership in that part of the world for the Palestinians.
Ben Rhodes, thank you so much.
Susan, are you shocked at all that with all the pressing priorities that are raining down on the country, that this is what Donald Trump has decided is a necessary investigation?
Not even that. Not even the teeniest, tiniest bit. This is what Donald Trump said he was going to do. Once again, when you think about the people Donald Trump is going out to investigate, he said he would do it. He said he would pardon January 6th. Rioters, there's nothing surprising in these actions. What will be surprising, though, is to see how much, frankly, the Democrats and those on the other side of the aisle take the bait and try and make it news. Because, frankly, I think he likes trolling everyone. Because this is going to be more than an inconvenience for Jack Smith. But, frankly, it's in its face and everything else that's going on in the country. It's not a top priority.
It may be trolling. But I'm curious, Jamal, what you think some of the greater impacts of this could be. I was speaking with Ron and Sana yesterday, as well as one of our economist friends, Natasha Sarin, who's often at our table. And they were telling me, basically that while we're analyzing what just happened with the firing of this BLS commissioner and the economic impact that could have on the country, the other sort of pillar that matters is this sense, both on the inside and the outside of our country, that the U.S. respects the rule of law. That it's not like a kangaroo court system here. What are you worried we're careening toward?
Yeah, I just think this is another distraction. I don't think the average American voter really cares that much about this investigation to Jack Smith. I think they see it as another example of Trump flooding the zone and distracting us from the economy, and I still can't afford my child.
The recent jobs report included received the figures for May and June, which is a normal part of the process job. Numbers are often updated later because misusing employment accordingly can be difficult. However, this time, these updated numbers showed that 258,000 fewer jobs were added than previously reported, which is a big drop. These revision now show that the last 3 months have had the weakest job growth since the pandemic started, even worse than any 3 month period during President Biden's time in office. How did Donald Trump react to this negative news instead of addressing the actual problem? He criticized the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the person responsible for reporting the numbers. The kind of reaction after seeing the authorization style political when someone does not like the facts, they go after the people presenting them. Now that multiple months have down show weak job growth, Trump appears to be trying to the change of influence how the data is presented to former Biden administration officials. Dan Coe and Jade Bernstein joined a decision on this. Dan worked as chief of staff at the Labor Department. Will Jared lead the Council of Economic Advisors? The host reminded Jord of a recent conversation where they had talked about how the Bureau of Labor Statistics is now relying more on models and less on direct data collection, especially when tracking inflation. The question asked was whether the data could still be trusted. Jard responded by saying that yes, the trust of professional at the Bureau and stands by the data they produce.